Hello and welcome to another video from History, Myths and Legends. The Moon, Part 3. Walking on the Moon. Introduction. Assuming that those now watching this video have already seen Part 1 and 2, we now understand that the Moon has a minimum of 64% of the Earth's gravity instead of the declared 16.6%. I also tried to present how it might be responsible for the several biomes of the past, as well as allowing some edifications that our largest cranes would find nigh impossible to lift, let alone place them with chirurgical precision. If, on the other hand, you have not seen the two videos that precede this one, I strongly advise you to do so. You will find the link to the playlist in the description below. In this video, I will try to show more evidence that will bring further support to the higher surface gravity factor of the Moon. I will also address the possibility through a Moon's atmosphere, and in the conclusion, I will present some of my own interpretation of what the Moon really is and how it got here. So bear with me while I pick up where I ended last video with going to the Moon. Therefore, my next chapter is Landing on the Moon. It's time we face the consequences from the 43,495-mile neutral point distance and its implications of a high lunar gravity. This because if the neutral point distance were 24,000 miles from the Moon, then the 1/6 gravity would be expected and the fuel requirements for escaping the Earth, reaching the Moon, landing, liftoff and returning home would have been met, meaning the astronauts could have landed with the lunar module and taken off again, allowing them to complete their Moon exploration as planned. However, considering that the Moon's gravity must be at least 64% of Earth's, the fuel requirements would be quite different, since it implies that the required payload ratio for landing and takeoff must be at least 7.2 to 1. Meaning that the orbital velocity to be reached or braked is approximately twice of what it would be needed under 1/6 gravity. In turn, and because this all works exponentially, the fuel requirement would be 4 times the declared numbers for liftoff and braking. I will not waste your time with numbers, the reason why I placed the mathematics supporting this on the screen and not in words. The facts are that the ascent stage would have to weigh 7.2 times the empty weight, or 34,560 pounds. Second, the fuel requirements to soft land and fully loaded ascent stage would increase the lunar module total weight to approximately 250,000 pounds. Therefore, the LM alone would be nearly as large as the Titan II rocket that had a declared weight of 330,000 pounds and was 103 feet in height. Understanding this, realize that the LM with the declared weight of 33,200 pounds would have to increase it by more than a factor of 7. Nevertheless, even with the current 64%, it would require a large rocket just to escape from the Moon, let alone soft land the takeoff rocket in the first place. With this in mind, one can but conclude that if we went to the Moon, it was not done with rockets alone. There must have been some other technology at play that allowed the voyage possible. Perhaps this is why the Russians pulled out of the race just when they were on the lead to land a man on the Moon. Walking on the Moon. Considering the value we have been given of 1/6 or 16.7% gravity, a 180-pound man would only weigh 30 pounds on the Moon. Because of this, much speculation was done about what would be athletically possible for a human within the Moon's low-gravity environment. In fact, even the public expected some sort of spectacular athletic feats performed by the astronauts as they explored the Moon. Needless to say that none was ever performed. However, back then, everyone was hoping to see something superhuman-like. Here are some examples. In the November 1967 issue of Science Digest, there was an article written by James R. Barrie under the name How to Walk on the Moon. In it, Barrie stated his predictions that man would be able to make 14-foot slow-motion leaps, perform backflips and other gymnastics like professionals, and be able to easily move up ladders, and poles with their arms only. In 1969, within the writers of US News and World Report, we read the following about the Moon. With gravity on the Moon only 1/6 as strong as it is on Earth, a home run hitter in a lunar baseball game could drive a ball well over half a mile. A golfer's drive from the tee would sail clear over the horizon. So let's look at these ideas objectively. The height and distance an object can reach within a gravitational field will depend on its initial velocity. Therefore, and with the 1/6 gravity in mind, an object launched with an equal force would travel 6 times further on the Moon than it would on Earth. Therefore, an astronaut that attempts a vertical jump on the Moon with the same strength he would apply on Earth, and considering the weight difference, it would have to be more than 6 times higher than what would be possible on Earth. Obviously, to be fair, we must also add the weight of the suit, claimed by NASA to be 185 pounds, which is about 84 kilograms, a tall order for a human on Earth to carry. Even a trained athlete would struggle after a while. Nevertheless, under the declared 1/6 gravity of the Moon, this would not be a problem, even considering an astronaut weighing the same as the spacesuit. Their combined weight on the surface of the Moon would only be of 62 pounds, or something like 28 kilograms. This being about 1/3 of what the astronaut would weigh on Earth. An average man is supposed to jump about 18 inches from the ground without any particular training. Therefore, a highly trained athlete, which the astronauts were, would be able to jump much higher than that without even making an effort, especially considering it would only be weighing 1/3 of his normal weight. I will use the famous jump attempts by John Young, Apollo 16, that were televised. Before presenting what he accomplished, it is important to understand that the spacesuit did not hamper the movements required for a jump, since they could bend their knees well enough to perform a power jump. In fact, through the video, we can see that he can move his arms and legs more than well enough. Now, under the 1/6 gravity, he would be able to jump over 6 feet off the ground. However, and after several tries, he could only do the same 18 inches or 45 centimeters an average man would do on Earth. However, as we have seen in part 1, the lie is different at every level, and there are very strong indications that the spacesuit only weighed 75 pounds and not the 185 NASA told the world. Why? Well, one of the reasons is quite simple, since a fully equipped astronaut should be able to jump over 6 feet off the ground if the Moon had only 1/6 of the Earth's gravity. But as we have seen, it only obtained the same 16 inches than a normal human would jump on Earth. Moreover, a 64% gravity would cause serious problems during exploratory tasks. So let's take a brief look of what happened. As expected, every task to be performed by the astronauts was carefully planned in advance. All the astronauts had to do was to stay in schedule. However, and although even if considering the indicated weight of 185 pounds for the suit, on the Moon's given 1/6 gravity, the total weight of the astronaut would be around 60 pounds. So why were so many walks cancelled? Because of exhaustion. It wasn't because of the suit's mobility, because all of them indicated that they could move well while wearing them. It seems that a much higher gravity is the best explanation to this problem. Nevertheless, some of these assumptions have been made with footage of the several landings on the Moon, and I for one think them odd in the very least. The astronaut seems to be moving around while suspended in cables. I do not doubt we went to the Moon. I just very much doubt we were shown where they really landed and what they saw that caused them to stay away for so long. The Moon's atmosphere. This is a subject that has little to no attention from the academic community. And it is easy to understand why. After all, with only 1/6 of the gravity of the Earth, the Moon has not near enough gravity to hold an atmosphere. Therefore, the surface was predicted to be under near vacuum conditions. However, we all seen the dust rooster tails from the lunar rover and the apparent soft dust surface. where prints were left without effort. This is interesting because we now know, as we already knew then, that dust particles, when within a vacuum environment, behave very differently than what we saw in the NASA videos. In fact, we find in Exploration of the Moon by Franklin M. Bradley that a scientist from the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, Cambridge, Massachusetts, called Fred Whipple, contended that dust particles would become so tightly packed together without gases to filter in between and separate them that Whipple and his supporters had no doubts that dust was so compacted on the Moon as to become a strong crust capable of supporting men and their vehicles. This was then verified by Dwayne Bowen of the North American Aviation Company. He accomplished this by releasing a steel ball into a container of fine dust-like particles in the Earth-like conditions, and the ball promptly sank. On the other hand, when the ball was dropped under the same conditions but in a near vacuum, the dust particles had become so compacted that a crust was created that was capable of supporting the ball impact and weight. Furthermore, none other than Wernher von Braun also agreed with the above results in his 1971 book, Space Frontier. In this book, he tells us that many people had always held that there cannot be very much loose dust on the Moon. Von Braun mentioned that a simple experiment showed that dust in a vacuum, such as on the Moon, becomes hard-packed, and that adjacent dust particles will fuse together into a pumice-like substance. So again, some atmosphere must be present. Otherwise, we must assume that all the NASA footage is a forgery. In fact, since it's now nigh impossible to deny the at least 64% of gravity on the Moon, the absence of vacuum is nevertheless a fine addition to our evidences. What logic now implies is that an atmosphere does exist, this because volatile substances and gases continuously given off by the planet cannot escape the pull of gravity. Under these continuous conditions, the Moon would soon reach an equilibrium state, where the density of the air at the surface would remain constant and subjected to the same variation we find with altitude on Earth, only at its own scale. I am trying to make this short, but I must add this. Due to the tidal locking between Earth and Moon, the middle band of the Moon's forever-facing side has an extremely compressed atmosphere, meaning it will reduce the need for a pressurized suit, and justifying why all missions were done well within this area. Even more, because they were done in valley areas that would increase even more the thickness of the atmosphere in that area. Conclusion. We are left with a difficult choice. Either what we have seen from NASA is almost, if not completely, false, and we have never seen an astronaut on the actual Moon, or the data we got from the missions is contradictory to the evidences. This is why I think it is most likely that we are only shown part of those missions, and only the Moon landings and walks were somewhat faked, partially recorded in studio conditions right here on Earth. However, as I stated before, I do believe we went to the Moon, just never got to see where they really went and did, more importantly, what they saw and who they met. You see, to me, the Moon is not a natural object. To me, as I describe in detail in my not yet published book, The Helix Tree, the Moon is a very unique Aryan-forming ship used by the Aryans to flee from their galaxy, where they were doomed to die by having violated the sacred commandments of the Pelf, their creators. They managed to flee, upgrading the Forbidden Gate already on the ship to a G-gate level by using the power of one of the black holes that were supposed to consume them and their galaxy. They were able to power it, but not of choosing their destination. They emerged right here on the solar system through the P-gate, Phaeton, that exploded in result, leaving the asteroid field in its wake. Mars, the main harbor of life then, was severely impacted and the planet was never again the same. Sidonia, the settlement of the shepherds of this galaxy, the Syrians, as Aryans were theirs, was lost in a few years afterwards. Therefore, the Aryans made some repairs and used the seriously damaged ship to crawl up to the second best planet, the Earth. We can still find evidence of those damages on every single old structure on the Moon. I recommend Richard Oldland for those that think me wrong. The Earth, a planet that without a moon was a serious challenge for life. Not only it was not axis stabilized, his weather was constantly cyclonic and way beyond what we today have when at its worst. The Aryans then used their ship, the Moon, to stabilize the Earth and its tilt, and voila! So in short, those that created us arrived on the Moon. In the few years that followed, they fought the few Syrians that were responsible for this system, and the Syrians fought them well, forcing them to abandon the colonization of the Earth on their own. That thus resulted them in violating yet another sacred rule by creating a being with much of their essence, as the Pelf has done to create them in the first place. You see, I believe that humans do not belong in nature, and we do not belong to spirit, because we came from both and are gifted beyond what nature gives to creatures. We owe that to our creators, that after long wars, first against the Syrians, and after defeating them amongst themselves, became too few to rule openly. Thus the era of the godsons began. Thank you for listening this long. If you wish to learn more from my own mythology, please let me know, since I see no immediate chance to revise and edit my book. I might consider to expose it all right here on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like, subscribe and comment. I always learn from your comments. My name is Ricardo Calvario, and you can find me through the links in the description.
I regret to announce this is the end. I'm going now. Bid you all a very fond farewell.